to the City Club of Portland Friday Forum. City Club is where we bring civic-minded people together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Karen Curvin, President of City Club, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at Sentinel, and those of you listening on OPB radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partner, Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are AARP, Barron Liebman, Iberdrola Renewables, Perkins Coie, Portland General Electric, and Providence Health and Services. We are grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. Please join us next week for a forum on safe roads and Measure 88 driver cards. City Club members voted to adopt the recommendation of the Research Committee and advocate on this measure. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, City Club will be live tweeting at today's event. You can follow or mention us at pdxcityclub, and be sure to follow the conversation by using the hashtag CityClub in your own tweets. Today's moderator, John Oster, will facilitate a question and answer session with the audience and our guests, Serena Boston Ashby, Diane Lynn, and Gabriel Metcalf. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all of our audience members, please locate the index cards on the center of your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. Hold your cards up high, and City Club staff will collect them prior to the start of the Q&A. And now for our program. As housing costs once again begin to skyrocket, we increasingly ask, is it too late to keep Portland affordable? Today we will learn from local leaders who are working to ensure structural solutions to our affordable housing crisis and draw on lessons from San Francisco to understand the consequences of our current trajectory. We will explore what we can do to preserve and foster an economically and racially diverse city. Lastly, we will confront the realities of gentrification and displacement and explore ways our region must change to ensure all people have a decent place to live. Today we welcome Serena Boston Ashby, who grew up in the Gresham and East County area of Portland and became a young activist at age 10, organizing around fair housing and public safety in Northeast Portland. Serena has strategized for national and statewide electoral campaigns and ballot measures and conducted government relations in the areas of water regulation, workforce development, consumer protection, and health equity. Currently, Serena is the director of the Portland African American Leadership Forum, PALF, is that correct? PAALF, which convenes African Americans around a common action agenda to advance prosperity. Among other issues, PALF focuses upon gentrification and displacement and their impact upon education, housing, economic development, and health. She is a member of the Children's Dental Task Force and on the board of directors for the Bus Project and Basic Rights Oregon. Diane Lynn joined Proud Ground as the new executive director in December 2013 after nearly 6 years in Marin County, California, serving as director of Ritter Center, which provides services to low-income, working poor, and homeless families. Diane is the former Multnomah County Chair from 2001 to 2007 and served as Commissioner, District 1, prior to serving countywide. While with the county, her top priorities were providing fairness and justice for communities of color and LGBTQ individuals and vital services to the county's most vulnerable people. Diane is a native of Portland, raised her 2 children here, and has worked to improve conditions and build community for vulnerable and underserved families throughout her career. She is thrilled to be back in her hometown to promote the dynamic mission of Proud Ground as one of the nation's largest community land trusts. Gabriel Metcalf is the executive director of SPUR, a nonprofit membership organization much like City Club that promotes good planning and good government through research, education, and advocacy. Under his leadership, SPUR has grown dramatically in influence and membership. Before coming executive director in 2005, Metcalf headed up SPUR's policy and advocacy work for 5 years. Prior to SPUR, he worked for the Bay Institute, an environmental organization focused on California water policy. He was also a co-founder of City Car Share, and for many years served as its board chairman. A frequent writer and speaker on planning and policy topics, Gabriel earned a master's degree in city planning from the University of California, Berkeley College of Environmental Design. Jonathan Oster, Executive Director of OPAL, Environmental Justice Oregon, is a civil rights attorney and community advocate who has been working on issues of urban environmental justice and civil rights for the past 15 years. Jonathan co-founded OPAL in 2006 to help sustain and grow the environmental justice movement in Portland metro area. He has served as OPAL's director since 2010 and focused OPAL's work on transit justice, investments without displacement, air toxics, and leadership development. John serves as the vice chair of the Oregon Environmental Justice Task Force and is an adjunct professor of law at Lewis and Clark Law School, where he teaches a course on environmental justice and runs a clinical internship program that helps build capacity within community-based partners working on issues of racial, environmental, and social justice. Please join me in welcoming today's guest to the stage.
Hello, good afternoon. Karen, thank you for that lovely introduction, and I want to thank former Mayor Sam Adams, current City Club President, I believe, Sam Adams, and all the planners of this Friday Forum for having us here. Gentrification and housing policy is a really controversial issue, and it's a testament to the City Club's commitment to equity that they're taking on this issue today and raising awareness about this critical issue in our region. I don't want to take up a lot of time. I want to get into the discussion. We've got a great panel here to talk about these issues, but I just want to set a framework for the discussion, establish a couple of principles around the discussion. The first is that we are experiencing an affordable housing crisis, clearly in San Francisco to the south, and an increasing crisis around affordability here in Portland, and that these crises are not defined in the boundaries of one city, but they're regional in scope. The second thing is that gentrification, it's a hot button word, it's polarizing, but the real issue that we're talking about here is displacement. And sometimes these two get conflated, and it's important to remember that what we're really talking about, we want prosperity, what we're talking about is the displacement of low-income families. We can't get caught up in the ugly words of the politics of rhetoric around gentrification. The third and final principle, just to establish the framework for our conversation, is that we're really looking for transformative solutions. We're not looking to nibble at the margins because we've tried that and it hasn't worked. And we really need structural change that can impact policy across the region, and looking at both the public and private sector. We're not going to be able to rely on just public dollars to get our way out of the affordability crisis, nor should we expect that the private sector can do it all alone. So it's really that combination. So with that, I'd like to get into the questions and hear from our panelists. And the first question is really just about how we got to this situation. How do we end up with an affordability crisis? And Gabriel, I'd like to start with you, if you could talk about the context in San Francisco.
Okay, well, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I have to say, it's a little bit of a funny placement for me. I feel like I've been sent back from the future for you guys to say, wait, you've got to take a different turn, or you're going to end up where San Francisco is. And here's why I think that. I mean, I think the national media has been reporting endlessly about all the craziness in San Francisco. It's super expensive, and people are protesting tech companies. And so in that sense, I think we can all start with the premise that maybe for Portland, San Francisco it's the best example anywhere of a bad example, right? It's all these things you don't want to be like. But I guess I would say, I'm not sure that there's a lot of things San Francisco did on purpose, certainly, to end up here. We have rent control, which I know you can't have here. We have inclusionary zoning, which you also cannot have here. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on affordable housing. Well, around 100 million every single year on affordable housing. We've taxed ourselves over and over to pay for affordable housing. We put in universal health care before Obamacare existed for anyone who lives in San Francisco. We're about to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We'll do that this November at the ballot. Building on previous living wage measures that we've passed. So we've done all these things that I would say are the kind of the wish list of progressive organizations all over America, and yet we still ended up with this terrible affordability crisis. So I think that is a little bit of the dilemma that I guess I'd like to lay out today. At root, the problem is simple. It's a really nice place to live. Sounds familiar, right? Portland has that too. And we have a lot of jobs. We have a really booming economy. So those two things, a lot of jobs, nice place to live, means a lot of people are trying to live there, so demand is high. And here's where we did something wrong. Going back for almost 40 years, there is an anti-development culture in San Francisco and the Bay Area that's very pervasive, and so we have not increased housing supply to keep up with the demand, and that's it. That's what we did wrong. So we have rising prices, and I guess the problem for us is, in spite of how much money we spend on affordable housing, it's at least a couple $100,000 in subsidy per unit. So you can help thousands of people, you can help tens of thousands of people, but you cannot help hundreds of thousands or millions of people through that strategy, through the strategy of affordable housing. And so in our case, we have millions of people who are struggling with affordability in our region. And so the tools we have available to us do not scale up to millions of people. So it ends up being very random, almost like a lottery, who gets the affordable housing. And so we are struggling with the need to make a more fundamental shift in our planning and housing policies so that we actually start to bring down average housing costs, so that regular people, not just people who win the lottery, can afford to live there. We have some ideas how to do it, and this is one, we can't blame it on Republicans. There aren't any Republicans left. We can't blame it really on the federal government. We did this ourselves. So maybe in there are some, there'll be some interesting lessons. Maybe you guys can do it better than we did.
Thank you. Diane?
Good afternoon. Very thrilled to be here, thrilled to be back in my hometown. And I am anxious to start talking about the creative solutions and the ways in which we can take on that question of what Gabriel just proposed, which is when you do all those things and make that kind of investment, how do you go to scale with models that can really impact more families and bring Portland to a place where we're going to be more proud, and it'll reflect the values of both San Francisco and Portland. I wanted to share today, and many of you already know this, that we have a couple particular challenges here. The urban growth boundary, which many of us are very proud of in concept, actually does create more pressure in the inner core of our city, to be sure. there's projections of growth. We can blame it on Portlandia, whatever it is. A lot of people are coming here. The numbers are almost staggering. If it's only a fraction of what Metro's proposing, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of new people coming. We've got a couple limits in Oregon, which we surprisingly are famous for, even though I think there are amazing people here, great creative thinking, ahead of our time on a lot of initiatives, and at the same time we tend to get undermined by our lack of, by the wobbly tax system, of which you all know very well, having been a part of this club for long enough. And then on top of it, in the affordable housing arena, we're short a couple tools that have helped other communities across the country. First of all, certainly inclusionary zoning, and I am here to suggest that we can't accept that it is impossible in Oregon or Portland, especially Portland, and I think we need to grapple with what that could mean in real terms. And we've never had a chance to really pursue a real estate transfer tax. Those are the two areas where there's a nexus in housing that would provide a source of funding for a housing trust fund of sorts that would really boost our continuum of housing services, starting from people coming right off the streets to people who really are ready and are stable and are working families and ready for home ownership. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later in terms of what's possible there and the tools that could hold those units in permanent affordability. Here are the facts of the matter. Many of you like facts and figures. We are vast majority of units coming online, about 14,000 are market and higher. About 20,000 permits were let. Some of the data is conflicting, but it looks like we're just barely over 3% vacancy rate. We know what that means, and the rents have been up region-wide about 7.4%. In some of the sub-markets, mostly inner Portland, inner southeast and northeast Portland, rents are doubling. People are trying to get into rental units. 60 people are showing up to see one apartment. Timing is, if you're not there right away to sign a check, you're out. And that's a reality here. That's the pressure that's building. And we are one of the tightest rental markets in the country. Portland is poised itself to be an attractor for out-of-state developers. We really need to think about what that means. And the question is, again, thanks to Gabriel's setting the stage for us, is how do we get ahead of this curve, at least in the areas that it isn't already too late to create affordability. Final thought on prices. The median price of a home, purchase a home in Portland in August was about $295,000. We are pushing right up to $300,000 a unit, and that's the reality we're dealing with right here and now. And as every day passes, the affordability pressure and the interest in single-family homes in the inner city is growing and growing and growing. So as we talk through this process, let's understand that that's kind of where we are right now.
Thank you, Diane. So Serena, 20 plus years as a community activist, a lot of that engaged in the issue of housing and
I should never put that in
affordability.
my bio that I started at age 10. I don't know why I decided to say that, but yeah, okay. And now you're telling people how old I am, but that's okay. Well, good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you to the City Club for hosting this forum and to everyone up here that I have the opportunity to be with. I think, perhaps I was asked to answer this question from the perspective of African Americans, people of color, in terms of how we get here or how we got here. This whole conversation about the housing affordability crisis, I believe, has really been made a priority because it's been increasingly difficult for white people and middle-class people to afford homes in Oregon and in Portland. I would say historically for African Americans and for people of color, we've always really been in an affordability or a housing crisis really since the very beginning. I think it's interesting just in terms of how we really time the conversation and how we articulate that for population overall, but also just really, I think, drill down deep into the subsets of our populations who have their own experiences. Namely, the group that I work for represents African American community interests, but we also work in concert and coalition with many other groups that have long experienced these problems as well. So I say that to say, you know, for the African American community, you know, how we got here really started with, you know, our introduction in the state, or how the state really primarily treated African Americans. And you can start with the Lash Law of the late 1800s. You can also talk about how, you know, African Americans were excluded in the state constitution not too long after that, how that was repealed in the 1930s. Our Accommodations Act in this state came about a little bit late compared to other states. But right before that, you know, there's the story that I think is always very powerful. When African Americans primarily came to Portland for the opportunities that came in the shipyards during the World Wars, there were about 25,000 to 35,000 that were reported to have come for those jobs. After the war, when those jobs were gone, about 10 to 15,000 stayed. It was the mayor of Portland and the Realtors Association, interestingly enough, that got together in a meeting and said, what can we do to get rid of these 10 to 15,000 African Americans? It was the Realtors. And what they did was they called the Urban League in New York City, and they asked for the Urban League to send a representative out to ask them that question. What can you do to take your people back out of Portland and out of our state? And the Urban League said, we're not going to do that. We're going to help you actually develop a community, help really keep jobs here for these people. And so I think, you know, in terms of how we got here, this is a very long story. You know, it was also really written into code that, you know, homes could not be purchased by African Americans. We have African American families in Portland that have been here for generations. They bought their first home through a white person. Bought their first businesses through white people, and it took a long time for that to be written out of city code, out of state code. So, you know, just to not really kind of dig, you know, all the way far into the past, but the past really does dictate the present. If we talk about, you know, the shorter version of the history, you know, in the last 20 years, I think everything in terms of shaping the urban experience of people of color, African Americans, and low-income people really started with urban renewal. And the way that urban renewal has been designed to really price people out of their homes, out of their communities. I think there have been a lot of vocal people, and I think some rich conversation, namely that was hosted by the City Club not too long ago, really about how urban renewal has really forced mass gentrification and displacement of people. It's been projected that, you know, in the last, you know, 10 years or so, at least 10,000 people have been forced out, mostly African American and people who are low income. So just, you know, in terms of how we got here, I think how we got here is very deliberate. I don't think it's an accident. How we got here in terms of, you know, a housing crisis for, you know, people who I think are middle class or upper middle class trying to really stay in the housing purchase game, that's one conversation. But a conversation in terms of how we've gotten to a crisis, I think for other populations, it's been deliberate. And I think, you know, it makes for, I think, forward thinking when we talk about some of the things that Gabriel talked about, you know, or mentioned that San Francisco has that perhaps has not gone as well, that Diane and her organization are really trying to move forward on. As we talk about that, I think it's very important to be very specific in terms of how that impacts communities, and also to, you know, I think really talk specifically, I think on a statewide level, but on a local level about really where systemically things can be most beneficial for the people who are the most vulnerable.
Thanks, Serena. And, you know, just to underscore this last point that Serena was making about urban renewal, you know, whether or not you agree that the intent behind urban renewal is to discriminate against low-income families or families of color, you know, you really can't argue with the fact that urban renewal depends on some measure of gentrification. Tax increment financing doesn't work unless the tax base is increased. And so when we're dealing with issues of urban renewal, often what we're talking about is how to mitigate, you know, how to put into place some type of anti-displacement strategy, but we're operating from a premise of gentrification, and we're trying to mitigate that as opposed to operating from a premise of how to make communities strong and resilient and secure. So that's a really important point. Thank you for bringing that up. Moving on a little bit to what we might do going forward, you know, there's a lot of new market rate housing coming online, both here in Portland and in San Francisco, thousands of units. That's not going to do much for affordability. In fact, it's going to make affordability even worse. We can always use more money for the most vulnerable populations, the 0 to 30% of the MHI, but often we're stopping the bleeding at that level, and is not necessarily going to help with securing a middle class or workforce housing. And really, housing is this whole spectrum in between high-end market rate and on the lowest end. There's a whole spectrum there, and we're losing that middle. We're losing it. Maybe it's being exported to other localities in the region, but in the core, or in the urban core, we're losing those opportunities. And so I thought we could move to the next question, Gabriel, which is, where is the middle class going, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, I wish I knew. No, we often say that unsubsidized middle-class housing, which is what everyone wants, is like a unicorn, that it doesn't really exist, but we talk about it constantly. I think actually at the point where Portland is, you have some really good options that are going to get harder and harder for you as it gets more expensive. And I mean, I don't know how much you in the City Club have talked about inclusionary zoning, but it's a really, really good tool in hot housing markets. It's requiring market rate developments to set aside some of the units at below market rates, and you have to do it correctly and get the math right, but it is a really powerful tool that can help a ton of people. And anyway, I hope that's a conversation that you guys are having, because the sooner you put it in, then the more years you have to start to benefit from it. Similarly, strategies like land banking or acquisition rehab of existing units or land trusts, those get harder and harder to do as time goes on and prices go up. So there's great benefits if you can come up with financing sources to act now, and in a sense, as hard as it might seem to do now, it only gets harder. There's a debate: should we build affordable housing or should we increase supply at all levels? Why have that debate? Just do both. There is no conflict between doing both, and I really think there's not one strategy, and you can kind of prove that every idea anybody has, you can sort of prove that it won't be sufficient, it won't be enough. We'll never have enough money to build affordable housing, or we'll never add enough supply to drive the price down, and you can kind of make that argument tearing down everyone else's position. But I think that's wrong. It's that each of those solutions is only a partial solution, and the more of them you can put in place, the better, and they really don't conflict with each other in most cases.
Gabriel, I'm gonna put you on the spot and ask you a quick follow-up, if you don't mind. Just having read some of your publications, you write a lot about the need for more infill development, and also this issue of, I don't know if it would be technically transit-oriented development, TOD, but certainly talking about, mixed income housing along transit lines with no parking. And this has been both infill and the parking situation for new apartments has been a very hot button issue here in Portland. And so if you could just share a little bit of your experience.
Yeah, well, we actually think that parking policy is an affordability strategy, and it's a little complicated, but just in a literal sense, when you're building structured parking, it's $50,000 per parking space that gets added on to the cost of housing. So if nothing else, you don't want to bundle it in with the price of housing, with the rent or the sales price. And so we passed a law a decade ago that requires all developers to unbundle parking from the price of the unit. So you get to decide, you have the option to save the money by not owning a car and not paying for parking space. But I actually think in neighborhoods that are gentrifying, you can go further and you can make it illegal to build parking. And what that does is it sets a cap on how expensive those units are going to be, because people who are truly wealthy are not going to buy those units if they don't come with a parking space. And so I think in selective neighborhoods that are gentrifying but have development happening, you can use parking policy as a way to control purchase price. Now, that is hypothetical. We haven't done that. Any market rate developer will tell you we can't get financing for our projects without parking, and that might be true, and I'm not going to tell you it's not true. I will just say there are a lot of places where market rate developers get their money, and not all financiers are the same. We have found in San Francisco that these ideas about ratcheting down parking in new development, which started out very radical, have gained market acceptance by the development community and the financing community over time, and that we're able to kind of every few years ratchet it up. I guess I would just add one more related point. When you think about household budgets, a lot of times it makes sense to think about housing plus transportation as a combined cost, and the Center for Neighborhood Technology has done a lot of the work on this. In some cases, you can really help households the most by making it easy for them to not have to own cars and really drive down the transportation part of that equation, and parking policy could be part of that too.
So Diane, strategies, policies that we should be pursuing?
Well, I'm going to go back to Gabriel's previous points. I thought that was a perfect launching pad. You know, are we going to get serious about having the conversation about where some of this source of funding for these more immediate investments in affordable housing? And we can argue the points about middle class. I'm with Serena. I think we really got to talk about how to help families of color get into housing much more aggressively. We have a debt to pay, and we need to get on feeding that back and getting more aggressive about that as a priority. The other point he made was we have to do it now. We have to move quickly. And let me explain quickly to you all what Proud Ground does and how it's a tool among many others. And I want to put this in the context of the wonderful work that a lot of housing organizations have been doing in Portland for years, from homelessness, all the community development corporations, up through all the groups involved, and we're all working together, really, through Oregon On and other organizations. We've established a new Partners for Affordable Home Ownership to work with the culturally specific agencies and Portland Housing Center and Habitat to come together and start talking about real aggressive housing policy. At Proud Ground, what we do is we provide home ownership opportunities using the community land trust model, allowing a middle, moderate to lower income family, and we use these terms, let me put it into real context. A family making about $43,000 a year of 3 or 4 people can buy a home at a medium price in our portfolio at about $140,000, with a shared equity model that gives that family a chance to come in with next to no down payment and very low monthly mortgage costs. We avoid PMI, private mortgage insurance in our process. We have good private funders, financiers that help us make this possible. The family actually does gain value, partial value in the home over time, and in the end, the community gets a permanently affordable housing unit in perpetuity. That's what we promise, and how it's possible is by the initial investment in one subsidy for that unit. And that's where we have to kind of come to terms with how much subsidy is necessary to really create a critical mass of housing opportunities and prioritize families of color and families making 60% of median income. By the way, 60% of the jobs created in the state of Oregon are people making, families making 60% of median income. That's what they're making. And they're not going to make a whole lot more in the coming years. So with a collaborative approach and really aggressive creativity that I know this community is capable of, we need to get aggressive, we need to get over the roadblocks that have been thrown up and bite the bullet, create some funding sources, and start investing. And the Community Land Trust is not the only model, but it's an incredibly powerful model as a way to hold units in affordability perpetuity and allow families to live in really good neighborhoods, great Portland neighborhoods, in solid family homes, and let their kids go to the neighborhood school, enjoy the amenities, plant gardens, have pets, and thrive in a community at levels of income that we would consider low to medium income. And a lot of that could be applicable on the higher end of the scale for workforce housing, and even lower in the scale if we partner aggressively with organizations like Habitat that do such an amazing job getting people out of subsidized rental.
Thanks, Diane. Serena, some strategies for securing some prosperity for lower-income families?
I think I'll just keep my answer just a little bit short, just because, you know, listening to what Gabriel and Diane had to say, I would probably suggest for us to think about what they were talking about. But I think, you know, what Gabriel was saying made me think about this in a couple of ways. I think you talk about the middle class, when you talk about you know, ways to kind of get at the problem. You know, the first thing that I would say about class and privilege, being a middle class person myself, is, you know, I think that the truth about the way that middle class people and the way that we're looking at housing in this conversation is more as a tool to build wealth as opposed to it being a right. And I think, you know, the truth is, and I'll say this as a middle class person, and I'll speak for all middle class people, we're never going to be rich. And I think, you know, we need to stop looking at housing as a tool to get rich and look at more of it as a right for all people. And I think that that is a conversation that we really need to have, both at the City Club and in society. And so I would just put that out there as something to say. I think, you know, digging in deep in terms of these prohibitions that we have put statewide on inclusionary zoning and rent control, we need to really untangle that. And I think what's really interesting is that, you know, we have legislators down in Salem that represent districts where there are serious affordability crises. And I think that we need for them to be leaders on this issue and really talk about it next session. I would also say, you know, on the public interest end, communities really need to organize themselves and stay very consistent around this topic. I think it is easy to really kind of point to this whole myth of scarcity, or we can't do this, we can't do that, you know, it didn't work in another place, it's been abused, but the truth of the matter is we need to do it. We need inclusionary zoning, we need to talk about rent control. I would actually so just offer up, you know, those things. I think on the local level, we need to either suspend urban renewal or really kind of look at urban renewal in a different way, and really think about how tax increment financing has been spent and who that money has been given to. It's, you know, mostly been given to developers as a way for them to profit, and that's been at the disbenefit of people, regardless of their color, regardless of their race per se, and really it's been at the disbenefit of taxpayers. I think a lot of this is, you know, a cultural and equitable conversation, but a lot of this is about a good governance, good government conversation that we need to have as a society.
Great points, thank you. And the 30% set-asides in urban renewal is just, you know, great on paper, great in principle. The practice has been a little messy, and so we kind of haven't yet seen the full range of benefits coming from that policy. And thank you for bringing up the issue of just values around the right to own housing. Actually, it's a great segue to our last question. I'm just going to say we only have about 5 minutes left before we get to some Q&A. And so let's keep our answers or responses just really brief on this, but it is a really important question and I don't want to let it slip. And it's really about the issue of culture. Is there something about dominant culture? How do we overcome some cultural norms within dominant society that perhaps are presenting barriers to economic diversity, to racial diversity, to the types of livable communities that we all want to see? Final thoughts?
Well, I guess something I would share, my experience with all the good liberals in the Bay Area, is that the idea that you can be a progressive person but still oppose the construction of housing which would allow other people to live in your community, I think that is a hypocrisy that should not stand.
I think that that's going to be something we're all going to have to face head on. How do we see this city shaping into the future? And are we going to be a vibrant urban community that does encompass effective single-family housing developments? Every day that passes, again, the single-family home is going to be more and more valuable in Portland. And again, we have about 230 region-wide that are already in the trust. Again, I would propose that we need to really get aggressive. And it's not just about Proud Ground, it's about the other agencies we work with and the city partnership with the Bureau there, and the private developers who, should play, obviously some do, a role in this. We've got to think about how, what the trajectory looks like for Portland and how we're going to, again, bite the bullet, face some of these funding issues, bring the tools. I have to add, if it hasn't already been, I don't think it's been said out loud again, that Oregon's company on not allowing inclusionary zoning is Texas. I don't think that's the values we all hold here. We have to decide what this place is going to look like and whether or not it's really going to embrace the issues of inequity, both in terms of certainly racial inequity and also income inequity. And I think the tools we're talking about really could make a big difference of that, but we can't talk about it or have equity screens on our conversations and not do something about it. So let's start continuing to have this conversation. You guys are all about civic discourse. We've got to, as Gabriel just said, we've got to really look at our values and see how they're going to apply in this issue and get moving soon.
I think it's been said really well already. I think that what happens when we have conversations around race and equity, usually people of color are asked to train white people and other people on how to think about those things. But I think that really the impetus really needs to be on people with privilege to really think about how to push themselves beyond their opinions and really living in action. And that comes down to how you spend your money, where you live. And, I think, in light of the events that happened, in Ferguson, there was that Pew survey that said that very few white people have a black friend, but black people have 1 to 4 white friends. And I think it's interesting just because I think many people live in their brain, and we mostly think that we're good people, but really examine how you live your life as a person. When I say you, I mean the proverbial you. I think it does go beyond, just how you feel. I think good-intended, well-intended progressives, it's really to how you live your life. And I think that at the core value will reflect how you shape your opinions around these critical conversations, which are really about your pocketbook and about your earnings. I think on a more tangible level, I would encourage people to support Black-owned businesses and really, continue to keep prosperity for Black-owned businesses, culturally specific businesses, which we know, really allow families to be stabilized in culturally specific communities, and really, I think, kind of keep a threshold of presence in neighborhoods where there have been an erasure of either African Americans or ethnic communities. So that's one tangible example that I would offer up. And I think, lastly, just really having high expectations, but really consistent conversations with leadership. Our elected officials are there, and they're supposed to represent us, and I think that, they still have some work to do, but I think it's really on us to make sure that they're engaged and they know what the right thing to do is. So
with that, we're going to turn to our Q&A portion of the forum. And as always, City Club invites members to step up to the microphone to ask their question. Asking questions at a Friday forum is a benefit of City Club membership, and membership is open to everybody. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and try to ask your question in 30 seconds or less. And for non-members, if you have a written question, please write it on an index card and hold it up high so that a City Club staff or volunteer can come around and collect it. And I'll try to read at least one of the questions on the index cards from non-members. So first question.
Cameron Witten, City Club member. First, I wanted to thank you all for speaking today. And thank you for also mentioning inclusionary zoning. I know that 4 of you have already expressed your support of that, but I want to be a 5th voice to also express support, and that we should all think about that in future conversations. My first question is directed to Diane Lynn, talking about all of the barriers that we have looking at revenue for affordable housing. And I wonder, in your opinion, if looking at something like a bond or a levy for affordable housing in Portland might be what's easiest to do right now to look for that funding source. And a second question, this is separated, but looking at Metro as a regional government, is there a place to look at them for helping us to make policies that really address affordable housing in the entire area? Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. I worked for a while with an extraordinary group of housing leaders back in the early 2000s on a regional affordable housing strategy. And we put a lot of effort into, I think it was post a lawsuit over the role that Metro would play on this issue. And now just think how many years have already passed since very few of those strategies have been used. It was an effort to kind of look at the region and see how to spread the support for affordable housing efforts region-wide. So I'm answering the second question first, which is certainly Metro could play a more active role. It could be more of an authority on the matter and could deal with the issue more aggressively regionally. The first question takes me back to the years Sam Adams was mayor. I was at the county. We grappled with how to keep the schools open at the end of a year to prevent them from closing 6 weeks early. We had such extraordinary crisis. We increased the personal income tax for 3 years temporarily. We taxed ourselves, as you guys have done in San Francisco. And having lived in the Bay Area, you know, progressive areas do tax ourselves. The problem is there just comes a point when we can't keep doing that and we can't do the easy thing anymore. It just puts too much of a burden on the people we're trying to help. We've got to figure out how to break the log jams on these important tools, and it's not a panacea, not any one of them, but them together could help bring a real momentum. I had a talk with people working on homeownership the other day, and we looked around the room, we thought, you know, if we really put our heads together and really combined our models, we could double the goals that we're talking about today just by, you know, new angles. But we've got to have the infusion of resources, and we're going to have to think long and hard about where those come from, and doing it yet another overlay of a local tax is going to be tough. It's going to be very tough.
Hi, I'm Katie Larcell, brand new City Club member today. And I'm excited to be asking you guys a question on this topic. I'm a member of the East Portland Action Plan. I live in East Portland on the other side of 82nd from here. And East Portland Action Plan has been working hard to improve our part of town. We have new parks, we have new sidewalks, and a great community spirit. And we're worried about displacement. Now, you have a part of town that already has a great variety of different kinds of people and different income levels. And how fast is it going to flip? And how worried should we be? And what should we be doing about it?
I'm going to take a shot at this one too briefly, and then please ask the other panelists to jump in. We've been working, there's just extraordinary group of people working in the Coley neighborhood with Hacienda and Verde and Habitat and several other organizations. We're a part of the team too to really look at what to do to prevent displacement in Coley, and then of course the same thing out in outer southeast and outer northeast. And I've been to several meetings out there, Rose and some of the other groups, Human Solutions, really working hard to really grapple with this. This is exactly where I would propose that a community land trust, in combination with other models, could help hold some of those units in affordability in the long run. Again, if we buy them now, as you mentioned earlier, prices are going up, but there are some affordable units now, or there are some ways we can do development in a less expensive way now. If we'd done this 20 years ago, we would be having a different conversation today. So time is of the essence, and your question is well placed in that we need to move now, and land trust and other models could be applied in Lentz and some other areas to really add to your community development and hold units in affordability for the long haul.
Serena, you want to add anything? I'll just say, so it is a terrible irony, right? When you work to lift up a neighborhood and the result is it gentrifies and people are displaced who are there. And you see that all over America. So yes, you should be worried. That said, the answer can't be that we don't improve neighborhoods. The answer has to be that we improve a lot of neighborhoods so that there aren't so few places of kind of good walkable urbanism. If we have lots and lots and lots, more and more of those kind of neighborhoods, then the gentrification pressures on each one become less. I mean, I think that has to be the answer. And so I would say you guys should take the lessons you've learned, the capacity you've built, and try to transfer that to help lift up some other neighborhoods. That might be the greatest way to make a contribution, if you're up for it.
Hi there, my name is Michaela Gore, and I'm a City Club member. I thought you brought up a really interesting point about how when you build apartment complexes without parking, it effectively chooses it to be a more low-income building. And I was just wondering what happens when you have a situation like we do in Portland where your mass transit costs $5 a day, which is outpriced for a lot of people. What's the relationship between affordable housing and affordable mass transit?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. So the idea that people can live car-free obviously doesn't work for everybody, and so this really can't be a one-size-fits-all. I would say this is a niche strategy that could work in some cases. $5 a day is less than the cost of owning a car when you factor in the car payments and the insurance and the gas and maybe the parking. So you still are probably going to come out ahead if you truly can live car-free. I think, Portland, like Seattle and San Francisco, is at a bit of an awkward in-between density where it's not dense enough to truly have great transit for everyone, and I think that's a dilemma. We have that in San Francisco too. It's really hard to get around on transit. So it is maybe a very niche strategy.
I think that brings up an important point really around public transportation and livability and housing. I think what I'm observing in Portland is the MAX rail really going through areas that I think have been revitalized through urban renewal, and homes that are nicer, more pricier. But we see bus lines, diminishing for people that actually need to get to areas where people who are lower income live. I think it is an important conversation really around the fare pricing in terms of the affordability of the tickets, but I think even more is really this access to light rail versus bus lines. And I think when we talk about public transit, we just think about it in this generalized way, but there's actually a difference between, where you can go on light rail, what time you can go. I think, there was a panel member at one of the forums that talked about, you can go, out to East County later on, but you can't come out later on. So let me explain. You can leave Portland and go further into East County on the bus, and that'll take you out later on into the evening. But if you want to come back into Portland, those bus lines stop much earlier into the evening. And I wonder why. I just wonder why.
And I would just make a quick statement that we don't have to accept $5 a day transit. Opal and the Multnomah Youth Commission worked with TriMet this year to bring youth fares down, and we can bring adult fares down too, and we don't have to accept that, so that's just the other piece of it.
Hi, my name is Brandy, and I'm a new City Club member. Thank you for speaking. I have the privilege of being able to live in a neighborhood of my choosing, thanks to an organization called PCRI. Briefly, they own 700 properties in North and Northeast Portland, and they provide them at market rate pricing. And hopefully I'll be a homeowner through Proud Ground. My question is, I'm sure maybe you guys have heard recently, the details might be wrong, but the Portland Housing Commission is going to be granted $20 million pretty soon, and they're trying to determine how best to allocate those funds. I was wondering, how do you guys think those funds should best be allocated to help with affordable housing in Portland?
Do you want to go first? Okay. Well, and thank you for representing PCRI. They are certainly a key member of the team for especially North and Northeast Portland, to be sure. We're going to be having, I think, 4 sessions through the city of Portland. The Bureau is represented here today to have listening sessions and hear from the community about how best to spend a $20 million investment in a 5-year window. And of course, we're going to be bringing a very strong, we hope, proposal about the component of home ownership. Now, how much of that could be spent in that way to get people like you into a home once and for all at probably a less, have you pay less per month, maybe not in subsidized rental, but in a market rate rental, and to be able to stay in that home for as long as you want and have that, again, that unit stay in affordability and perpetuity. We're certainly going to bring that forward, again, in partnership with the other agencies working together. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other proposals come to the table. A robust discussion, I'm sure, will be had, and I think there's going to be a final determination on those resources in the coming several months.
You know, the $20 million is an amount that's been offered up that's coming out of TIF. But I think, you know, an opinion is that there could be more than $20 million. I think at the end of the day, if you do the math, that, you know, $20 million is the start over this 5-year period, but it could be projected to be much more than that. So I think that should be said first. I think that the community needs to have its say, but I think from our end, particularly the organization that I represent, I think a community land trust would be helpful. I think, you know, really the truth is about, you know, taking money out of TIF is that, you know, it can only be used to build more affordable housing. But I think, you know, the community needs to be more interested in housing and in things that they can control themselves and own themselves that establishes wealth back into our community and stabilizes our community. So I think that that's one way to look at it. Just to answer this a little bit differently, you know, the problem with the allocation, like I said, is that it can only be used to build more housing, which I think is important. But I think the other truth of the matter is that the housing crisis for the African American community and other communities too is that it's not so much about not having enough housing, it's our ability to remain in our homes. And I think, you know, there is an experience that's happening in America that I think that's very true in Portland, where you have, you know, aging populations that have held onto their homes for a long time, and there have not been really proper or any at all estate planning or any ways to look at passing on their homes. They pass their homes on to their children who themselves have never owned a home before, never been involved in the maintenance of a home. And oftentimes, you know, when those children inherit those homes, some of the things that they do is they choose to sell the home off, or the home goes into ill repair and things like that. I think, you know, in Portland, we do have a shortage of housing, but I also think that there have to be conversations really within, you know, the African American community and other communities around where are our homeowners and how can we make sure that those homes stay in those families, and that, you know, that type of opportunity is stabilized too.
My name is Teresa Rayford, and I'm a City Club member since May, Cinco de Mayo. they got me. So, and I have more of a statement as opposed to a question because Serena answered some of that because, of course, with gentrification, as a fourth-generation Oregonian, I remember a city where there were lots of businesses and residential property that were Black-owned in North and Northeast Portland and even far out to East County. And so I think that in my statement that I want to remind us that we're not San Francisco. We don't have millions of people. We have a couple of 100,000, and that we have the benefit of our social capital in that reality. With the development that I'm working on with my family and my community, I'm using my social capital to get in contact with engineers and architects that can work with me, and I'm working with educators so that we can do innovative ideas and developing property that we already have and making sure that the resources that are available through that are something that's going to affect economics in our communities. And I think we need a lot more of that. And I think that if our leadership is on hand to educate and use their social capital and their investment opportunities, that we can create foundations to support people in continuing to live in these neighborhoods and sustain their housing opportunities. So thank you guys.
We have run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for today. As we close, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to today's guests, John Oster, Serena Boston Ashby, Diane Lynn, and Gabriel Metcalf. Thanks for listening.